maybe. Yeah. Okay. live for us, live for no one else but us. So that's cool. Hi, Renee.
Hey.
Welcome to Millennial Splaining. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. This is great.
Absolutely. I saw you on RJ's show, and the two of you were having an excellent conversation about activism and Medicare for all, and you were involved with the Medicare for, was it the M4 All March?
Yes.
So what is the first M? What is the first M for?
It's the Medicare for All March. So it's, it's just, no, it's March for Medicare for all.
There it is. Okay.
M for all. That's, sorry. Yes.
Cool. Okay. It's catchier if you just say the letters, so we'll stick with that.
Right.
But I'm excited. I'm excited about this March. I'm speaking at the New York March, which is super exciting for me. My first time speaking in a big event like that. So I'll be really happy to see everybody there, hopefully, who can make it. And if you can't make it to New York, there are, 40 other locations?
I think it's 44 now.
Wow.
I think the last note I saw. I might be wrong. I'm trying to keep up, but there's a lot. There's a lot of them. There you go.
Awesome. Yeah, so go to m4all.org and you can see where all of the marches are and get involved. Please, we need everybody on the streets for this. Everybody. Yeah, so you and I were just talking a little bit about Twitter activism and sometimes how it turns into Twitter pissing contests. So where, if we could just hop back into that mindset for a second, like what, tell me your frustrations about these stupid, like I'm right, you're wrong Twitter fights when we're all on the left and the same side.
Right. And so, and I have to remind myself, and this is what I was just about to say to you, like I have to remind myself that the Twitter world is actually really small. So when you're in the middle of watching these like back and forths, you feel like everyone's watching it. And then you have to remember that everyone's not watching it. And most people probably actually aren't paying that much attention. And so I try to remind myself all the time, like, you don't have to, I'm a high school guidance counselor, right? And I used to have a thing on my wall that said, you don't have to participate in every fight you're invited to, right? And for me, that's something that I always try to remember, like just because someone calls you out, just because someone says something, just because someone doesn't agree, it doesn't mean you have to fight about it, right? Like it doesn't mean you have to respond. It doesn't mean you have to go back and forth. And I understand that some people, and right, like everybody has to do what makes them comfortable, right? So if you feel so upset about something that someone else tweeted, like, and you feel like you have to respond, like, okay, like I'm not saying I'm perfect at this because clearly I get back at people sometimes, but I'm also a fan of my mute button, right? So if I know you're gonna just keep going, like I'm just gonna mute you, and then that way at least I don't have to see it, right? And I don't have to deal with it. But there's a real problem when everyone is so busy Twitter fighting that becomes the focus, right? So now instead of talking about the thing that needs to get done, everybody's talking about who held who down and, who called who out and who said this. And I'm like, and I said this to you, like, the fucking ocean's on fire, right? Like, yes. The ocean is literally on fire.
Literally though.
Literally on fire, right?
Yeah.
People don't have a living wage, and the living wage that just got like completely ignored isn't even actually a living wage,
right?
And wasn't even gonna get, it wasn't like they were gonna pass it and people were automatically gonna get $15 an hour. They were gonna wait 5 years to get their $15 an hour, at which point they needed to be making $30 an hour, because as we've all learned, like inflation continues, right? It doesn't matter what your pay scale is, it's all based on what everybody else wants.
Absolutely. We should be at $25 hour minimum wage right now.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. Like the moratorium on evictions is about to end, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the month. No plans at all to stop any of this. And then 2 months later, people are going to have to start paying their student loans back because, despite the promise, that's not going to happen either.
Right.
And so there are all these bigger fights happening and all these more important, in my opinion, more important things than like, you know, who told who off and said this thing on Twitter that like, oh, that was, you know, like, I don't give a shit. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, I'm so frustrated by it all because I feel like it's a distraction, right?
Yeah.
Like, everyone is distracted by like the Twitter stuff. And I'm like, what is going, like, how did we get to this place where that became the thing, like trying to say the thing that was going to get more people to look at and read it and follow it and like it and all these things. Like, but there's literally like 3 people who live outside my house on the street, right? Like literally right now, if I go outside, the 3 homeless dudes who my dog loves, like they live outside. Like I want that to be like the focus, right? I want that to be the thing.
Yeah.
And again, it's not me like, you know, I can be guilty of it as well. So I'm no saint here in this at all. But even when I do it, when I read it back, I'm like, oh, did you really? Like, you didn't really need to send that, did you?
Listen, I am no stranger to Twitter fights either, man. Like I feel like there are a few valid reasons to fight on Twitter with people. One, when you're actually working out a real issue and like the other person is interested in talking with you and you're hashing things out, that's productive. Another is when you are fighting a DNC troll and you are just burning the fuck out of them and everyone can see it. I think that's valuable because we need to call these people out. And I also think that it's valuable to it's valuable for podcasters and people who are interested in getting a message out to shit post on popular people's posts. So like as shitty as that kind of stuff is, it actually really worked out for me a few times recently. I had like 100 likes on 2 of my posts for on Jenks posts. I had you know, a couple on AOC, you know, and I'm like, I'm trying to get people to hear me, right? Like to hear my podcast. Right. So like that's valuable on some level for me because it's free advertising. So, right. You know, I think that we as a left need to acknowledge a few things. I think that we need to acknowledge that you know, media actors, whether they're independent or corporate, are media actors, and we are here to get you a message. And we are here to try to support ourselves while doing so. And it's an ugly business, and that's what we're doing. So let's not, you know, everybody else who has no stake in these things, like, don't have panic attacks about that stuff. Okay, please. This all, you know, doesn't need to be your problem. It's not about, we don't need to be calling each other Nazis. We don't need to be, you know, like flipping, you know, MAGA insults at each other and stuff. I do that sometimes myself. I get caught up in it. I understand. But like, you know, let's try to remind ourselves that we're all Americans and we're all on the same side and we're all trying to fight for equality. Okay. Like we need that. We need to do that. And we need as one voice to remind the entire comfortable corporate media landscape that this country is not comfortable, that we have not recovered from the pandemic. We have not recovered from the recession in 2008. We are still suffering. People have lived in tent cities that have been established since 2008. Tent cities, like we're not talking about that shit, right? If you think back to the Depression, like Hoovervilles were on the front page of every fucking newspaper. Where's that coverage? Have you ever seen a mainstream outlet cover a tent city? Like barely. Like you really have to look for it. So it's, you know, that's the mission that the left needs to be on right now, is that we are in such an economic straits that, you know, long-term discussions about what our country should be, and, you know, even philosophical fights about what brand of communism you like better or whatever, like that stuff needs to wait because there are people dying on the streets. End of story.
Right. And the funny, so you said, sorry, you said about the DNC trolls, which I get called a lot.
Yeah.
Funny enough. All the time.
Oh, yeah.
Every time I say something, it's because I'm a DNC shill or I'm a troll and sometimes I'm like, do you read the rest of the stuff? Like when you decided to call me this, did you take like a little stroll through my Twitter stream to see that all I do is complain about people, right?
Right.
Like me in the moment agreeing with one thing doesn't mean like I'm a troll and a shill for the DNC. Maybe it just means like in that one moment, the Democrat who said whatever they said that I agreed with was right.
Yes.
Like
Yes,
there's room
you're right.
for that. And it's okay. Right? Like people get mad at me about some of the people I follow. And I'm like, but I follow whoever, right? I very rarely, like I'm not, first of all, I'm not going through my list to unfollow somebody unless you do something really stupid. And then I'm like, all right, I can't listen to this anymore. But like, I don't take the time to do that. So half the people, I don't even know who they are. It's probably somebody who just posted something that in the moment I thought was cool. And then they followed me because we agreed in that moment and I followed them back, right? Like I don't have a major Twitter following. I'm not trying to have a major Twitter following. Like I'm not really interested in, you know, being like a blue check on Twitter. Like I don't care about that stuff, right? Like that's not important to me. Right. So for me, it's frustrating if I say something, if instead of reading what I said, right, and arguing with me on the merit of what I said, like you don't agree because of whatever reason, right? You decide that you are just going to tell me, well, you're just saying that because you're a DNC show and, you know, you're stemming for the DNC or whatever people say. Like, I can't, you know, like, I just can't. I don't have the energy for it. Like, I literally just can't. Sorry, my child is knocking. What child? What? Yes, go play. It's fine. Can you please make sure the dog has water? My life.
You're good. No worries.
I'm like, thank goodness this is why I asked if it's live or pre-recorded. So
yes. No worries. Cut it right out. Never happened. No problem. Yeah, and let me clarify too, like when I say fighting DNC trolls, I mean like please vet the person that you are talking to first. Like I have been in a few Twitter fights with people who actually, like, I went to their page, I made sure that they were literally posting only Hillary memes, like, you know, these people are literally transparent. I had a conversation with them. I live in New Jersey. This person claimed to live in Morristown, New Jersey. They said that they were not that rich, even though Morristown is the second richest county or city, whatever it is, in New Jersey. That's where like Whitney Houston has a house, like up in that area, like there are several celebrities that live up there. So, you know, I absolutely know that area. I've been up there. I went to school around there. Like you need money to live up there. Okay. And they were trying to argue me that they were in a similar situation to me. And I'm like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Just the fact that I live in a much poorer section of New Jersey than you says a lot. I mean, just, you know, I mean, not that this is like a who's poorer than who competition, but the fact to me that you are so interested in, you know, anyway, I don't know. It was from the way that they were arguing, you could tell that it was just like they had the same three talking points and they just over and over and over again. And actually one of the interactions I had on one of Jenk's tweets, I found out that the person who I was talking to, because I don't know TYT at all. Again, I'm literally trying to like hack. Like I'm fucking honest about it. I don't give a shit. Like this person was actually one of the public employees of TYT that I was arguing against. And I was like, oh. But whatever, I said my piece and you know, it's always a gamble. So anyway, that's what I have to say about that. But please, yeah, I mean, like, let's not call each other these things lightly either, because we already have enough, you know, DNC supporters that are calling us that to begin with. Right. So, you know, we don't need to litmus test each other all the time and stuff. Like there are huge issues like homelessness, like Medicare for all, that we all agree on and we're all fighting for. And even if that means that you have to band with a libertarian to get it or whatever, you know, then do it. Shut up and do it.
And so I have a caveat, right?
Yeah.
Because this is one of the big fights that I get all the time.
Okay.
So I have no problem with having a conversation with a libertarian, having a conversation with a Trump supporter, having a conversation with any of these people with these labels, right? But if when I have that conversation, I realize that you're a racist asshole, I'm not talking to you anymore, right?
Yeah, no.
So like, I feel like there's a line, right? It should be like a line in the sand where like I should be free as a Black person to say, you're a racist asshole, and I'm not gonna work with you, organize with you, stand with you, because in the end, you don't really care about me, right?
Right.
Because you've made a decision about who I am based on this, and I can't change this. Like, you can change being a racist asshole, but I can't change this. So one of us has to make a switch in order for us to actually be working toward the same end. And I get so much pushback on that, so much. You're just you're falling for the trick, you're just sowing the division. And I'm like, people, hello, I'm Black, right? like, I get that you want me to suck it up, but like, no, just like, no, I'm not, no. So I'm not opposed to the first conversation. And I have to re-explain this every time I tweet about it. Like, people are like, oh, but how do you know? And I'm like, but that's what the first conversation is for, right?
Right.
Like, you have the first conversation. And once it's clear to me that we're not fighting the same thing, like, you want me to fight for you so that you can get the thing that you want, that you don't think I deserve. So we're not fighting for the same thing, right? No. So yes, with the one sideline of like, we have to make a determination as to at what point, like, I'm not obligated to eat your shit because you think that I'm not worthy of the same things that we're supposed to be fighting for together. And I think that's something, I get a lot of pushback because of the people who push, it's all about class. It's all about class. So all of those people are like, they all hate me, which, okay, whatever, that's fine. But, I just feel like it's unreasonable to ask Black, brown, Indigenous, like, people of color, like, to ask them to actively work with people who are okay with their oppression. Right? Yeah. Like that, no. Just no.
That's an excellent point. No, that's an excellent point. I'm glad you said that. Absolutely. I agree. Yeah. I mean, and I think that there's a lot of like, especially when we're seeing it, I don't want to take it back to the podcasting world, but that's kind of like how I interact with the left is through podcasts and stuff. So like, it's kind of how I understand things. Like, so like, there is definitely right now a divide between like the Jimmy Dore stands and the TYT stands, and then like, like the Kyle Kalinske middle fence riders, who is pretty much a TYT stand at this point. And, I think that there are a lot of white people who are like, Kyle Kalinske and like Crystal Ball, who are, acknowledge that, white culture, white people are, invested in the DNC. A lot of them are not that left because they haven't felt the oppression like you guys have. And they're trying to bridge some kind of a gap to make, whatever. And I think, honestly, I think that there are, I'm the kind of person that says that there is a role for everybody in this world. So I believe that there is a role for them in this world. I believe that on some level, like the really radical leftists, some of their messaging gets to them, and then some of their messaging gets to the DNC, and then it shifts the Overton window, So I feel like, I don't want to completely, shit on them either. But at the same time, you're absolutely right. Like, it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable that Kyle Kalinske said the N-word for however the fuck long. It's not acceptable.
And that he excuses it when other people use the word because he decided to determine where the word is acceptable in use, right? And so I take issue with that. And I don't, I listen to an array of people, mostly because I like to get different sound bites, right? Like, I yes, I watch the new Crystalline Saga because I want to hear what they're talking about. Just
Right.
like I watch Fred Hampton's Leftist because I want to hear what they're talking about. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, I watch a lot of people, and I have like a constant rotation of different podcasts. Like I watch the Red Nation, which is awesome, and it's a fully run by Indigenous Indian American Indians. And so
Awesome.
there's so many different voices that you can listen to. And my opinion is you have to listen to everyone, right? So that you understand what different people are thinking. It's in my opinion, it's a bad idea to not listen to the people you don't necessarily like, because how do you know what they're like? If all you're listening to is people who agree with you, how do you learn anything, right? Like, how do you get like that altering voice that maybe says something? Like every now and again Sagar says something and I'm like, oh well, you know, shit, that's true, like that's right. You know what I mean? Like I'm not in disagreement. Now I have my limits. I have never watched Vosh. I don't really know much about him, but I have no inclination to start doing so. I'm not going to. So I have my pockets of people that, because I just feel like they're not going to bring anything to my table that's going to help my like growth or understanding or learning about something different. I just don't see any point in adding them to the table. But I also feel like all these battles that are going on between the more popular podcasts, like to me, I'm like, where is taking a side on this getting you? Right? Like, I don't really watch TYT because when it became clear that Biden was going to win, Sink did this weird, like, he's going to be like a grandpa on the sofa with it was a very weird, like, and I was like, I don't know, like, where this is coming from, but I knew that Biden being the choice was not going to be helpful, right? That it was not going to get anybody anywhere. And so I didn't really want to go along with anyone who was going to try to feed me this line that like Biden was going to really be the better choice. Like, if you just want to say like, vote Biden because Trump sucks and we don't want Trump, like I can appreciate that. I mean, I still didn't vote Biden. I can appreciate that argument. But to try and convince me that I needed to vote for Biden because he was better, right? Yeah. Because he was going to do something, because they were going to push him left, because he was going to be the next FDR, like all of that nonsense. Like I was like, I don't want to listen to this shit. So like, I just, anybody who was saying it, I kind of just, sorry, my child is wigging out right now. What? Nazareth. Sorry, I gotta go. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Right back. Sorry about that.
No problem. I think I sang the wrong song in there. In here.
Hey. I am so sorry.
No, it's fine. Please, it's totally cool.
We have a pit bull mixed rescue puppy who is 64 pounds, and he's adorable. But the 10-year-old, every now and again, the puppy will act like a puppy, and the 10-year-old's like, oh, he's trying to eat me. And so, I know you never said that. I know. And so, so I had to go rescue him from the puppy. I'm sorry.
It's cool. I get it. When I was a kid, I was terrified of big puppies. Sorry. I was scared the shit out of me.
Yeah. And now, so we were talking about the the big fights, right? So
yeah,
picking a side in these big fights doesn't help anybody, right? Like you being a TYT person and going against whoever the Jimmy Dore people are, you being for Jimmy and going against TYT, or you being for Kyle and being mad that Jimmy's like, why do we care so much about why people with massive like Twitter followings are arguing with each other, right? Like why are we in that? Would be like someone getting super invested in an argument that I'm having with my brother about who's gonna wash the dishes. You know what I mean? Like, how does it, like, what does it do? What does it do for the whole, you know what I mean? Like, I don't understand it.
I could take a whack at that question if you're interested in an actual answer.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so I feel like there are two things going on. I think that there is a huge segment of this population that does not feel like they can even tolerate corporate news anymore, right? And they are interested only in YouTubers and the independent, bread tube, whatever they call it. I think that a lot of interesting conversations are happening on YouTube. I think a lot of coverage of issues that is not spoken about on corporate media happens on YouTube, and Rockfin and other places now. So I think that, it's part of it is that it's kind of cool that, audiences feel like they can really influence and interact with their content creators. And I think that that's something that happens everywhere, not just in the independent left, but it's particularly in the independent left because they're specifically funded by their audience. So they have to listen, right? So that's an interesting dynamic that doesn't exist in that way in the corporate world with the audience. It exists with the donors, with the Jeffrey Katzenbergs and whoever. So that's an interesting democratization of media content. That's one issue. I also think that we really need to, as like the only people that recognize mental issues and emotional labor as a thing, we really need to understand that when people come online to fight, it's all like going into a bar to start a fist fight. You just had a bad day and you want to fight, and then that's what's going on, So there are some people who know that, and they get into it and they're having fun. And then there are some people who get into it because they're really passionate about an issue, or they really feel like they're being attacked, or whatever, and they don't understand that the other person is just arguing to have to vent their own emotional energy. So like that's a dynamic that we need to make sure that we deal with in a more healthy way, because there's too much of people taking this kind of crap seriously and thinking about it all day and having panic attacks, and we don't need that. I don't need that. Yeah. I've had that myself too. We don't need that.
I agree. And I still feel like even with that, like, so pick a fight about something real. Yeah. Right? Why are you fighting about other people's fights? Like that's the part of it that gets me. I'm like, who is paying you to defend this person so adamantly that every time someone says something, it turns into like this big, like every time I send a tweet out about multicultural organizing having to be done with the line where you stop at racism, I get attacked. Like literally, like people coming into my thread, and I feel like saying, well, why do you read my shit if it bothers you so much? Like just like fucking mute me, right? Like, yeah, it's okay if you don't agree, but you coming on to call me a racist because I don't, because I don't want to work with people who think I'm not worthy, right? Like, what is the point, right? And so I get this. I mean, I see it happening and I'm like, Oh my God. And every now and again I poke a bear because I'm annoyed about something. And then it starts an onslaught. And I'm like, well, shit, like I didn't actually mean to do that. That wasn't really my intention. But the more I see these things happening, and I just keep thinking to myself, like, how much further would we get if when someone said like, oh, well, you know, so-and-so said this about my guy. And so this is this, like, how much further would you get if you like attacked an issue, right? Like attacked the problem, right? Like focused on something that like actually means something to get fixed. Like this fight between all these podcasters, like nothing is getting fixed, whether they fight or whether they're in agreement, right? Like, and to me, I almost want people to be like, you know, like let's just not be invested in it, because all that does is keep it going, right? Like it just makes it grow and grow and grow. And so it's tricky, and it's also hard because obviously, like, you know, like if you're a journalist and your journalistic integrity is being attacked, then it's a little different, right? Because that's like your bread and butter, right? Like that's you. If you're being called out as a journalist for be doing something that, you know, questions your integrity, then I think you can't really avoid saying something, right? Because you have to defend yourself in that sense. But I also feel like the person who doesn't know you, doesn't work for you, isn't getting paid by you, it's also not their responsibility to defend you either, right? Like it's not really for them to kind of jump in and like make a point about how much journalistic integrity you have. Like, okay, it's great that you agree, but you could also just send the person you support a note that says, I'm sorry this is happening. I support you. I believe in your integrity. And like, leave it there, right? Like you don't have to necessarily like fight with the person who is also not being paid by the person that they're supporting.
That's an excellent point. That's a really fucked up way to show support of someone else, is to attack someone else on their behalf. Yeah. That's not healthy.
Right. It's such an unhealthy, and it's funny because somebody said to me, like, this is what Twitter does, right? They, on your feed, like it intentionally shows you the things that are going to get you annoyed so that you feel like you have to say something because you're annoyed. And that's like, it's created this space of just angst, right? Like where all you're doing is arguing about fucking nonsense. Like when all is said and done, instead of like, you know, really focusing on stuff. Like I started following Peter Kalmus, who's a climate person, he's a climate scientist, and he's phenomenal. Like the stuff sometimes that he presents, and I'm like, how come no one's talking about this dude? Right? Like this is like important stuff, right? Like these really small people with really small followings that, like, I feel like their voices are really, really good. You know, there's the Kim Brown down in Baltimore, like Burn It Down, Kim Brown. I love her. Like she cracks me up, and she talks about real shit that's happening, like in her community, and things that she wants people to pay attention to. And, you know, I feel like there's value in that, right? Like there's value in being about like the real issues and the real stuff and the real things that are happening, like right outside and around you and all that stuff. You know what I mean? Like that's, I don't know. I just feel like that's just way more important.
Yeah, I understand. I totally understand your point. And especially since, you know, local newspapers are going under like crazy. You know, these smaller outlets are really our only news on the ground, right?
Right.
So that's extremely important. And I definitely think that larger leftist YouTubers have a responsibility to uplift smaller ones for that reason. Absolutely. And you know, I'll also give a shout out to Jordan Sheridan and Status Quo. They've been doing.
I was just thinking that.
They are amazing, and Jen, they are amazing at like going on that 2-week tour and talking to people. I mean, that's the kind of work we need to be doing. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, I just feel like there's a better way to use this space than to try to grow your audience by like picking out like what you, there's a way to do it, like what you said about going into other spaces and making comments so that people can see where you disagree with what a popular voice is saying, so that they can hear your voice and maybe say, oh, well, she sounds interesting, so let me follow her. But that's very different than let me just pick at everybody that I can pick at to see like who I can get, you know, what I can get to trend enough that I can grow my following. Like it's just such a waste of time. Like I just,
and
it's crazy
not,
to me.
it's not good strategy neither, right?
No.
Doesn't make you friends, doesn't give you followers. If you want to know more about Twitter strategy, check out some Twitter strategy videos on YouTube. That's what I did.
Right. Because there are ways.
That's the best way to do it. Yeah,
there are ways. And I feel like if you have something really good to say, that eventually people catch it, right? And they start, like, no one started with 100,000 followers, right? Like everybody started with a small following until people realized that what they said was like worth listening to, right? And so there's room for that. And I like a lot of people that people are like, oh, you listen to that garbage. And I'm like, well, yeah, like people are really mad at me about Brianna Joy Gray, and I love her.
I love her. Like, she's so smart. Yeah.
Right. I'm like, have you listened to some of the questions that she asked people? Like, it's like real thought, right? Like it's a really well thought out, explained, like, tell me why you think this particular thing is, whatever it is that she decides in that moment she's going to ask the question on. And I am motivated by the way she talks to people, right? She's just super intelligent. And I think that's worthy of the attention. And I don't always agree with all the stuff she says, right? But that's okay. Like, you don't have to agree with someone all the time to admire the way that they talk to people, right? And
absolutely.
And you know, you made a point about like the larger podcasters you know, helping the smaller ones out, and I agree. But I also feel like what people may see as, oh, look, they're doing these people a solid, I don't know if that's really like going on the small podcast tour, right? And jumping from small, like you're more likely to gain from their audience than they are to gain from your audience.
Yeah.
So I don't know that that's
feature
really...
us on your show, please.
Yes. That's the part of it that I'm like, you know, like, yeah, it's cool. Like maybe they'll get a few people more who look or listen or whatever, because they're like, oh, well, so-and-so's on there. But you're not being exposed to their larger audience, right? So like when the whole thing with the N-word and Vosh and Kyle and all these things were happening, I remember I started tweeting and saying, well, like, have Sabrina on like Kalinsky's show or on Crystal and Kyle, because then you can expose that voice. Like have JB on or have Nick on or like whoever, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many voices out there that have really good things to say. And again, I don't always agree with all these people, but that's okay, right? Like you're not helping them by going on their show, right? Like their audience already knows they're there.
Right.
Like, you need to bring them to your audience because your audience probably doesn't know that these people exist. And so, you know,
that would be the best option.
That, by the way, that is about to blow up your comment. They're gonna be like, oh, she's a DNC show. You know, like
here's why I'm gonna mitigate for a second, and maybe it'll help us out. But I'm gonna say also though that like some of the you know, some of the people like a lot of like I, you know, obsessively watch Jimmy Dore. And when he goes on somebody else's show, that's a lot of how I find other people's shows too, is because he did an interview with them, and like the algorithm works that way on YouTube. So I will say that, and I will say that RTs from big people amazingly help. So that's another thing too. If you say, you know, like if Jimmy would come on my show, please, then he could RT that would be awesome for me for that video, and then that video gets more views in the algorithm.
Right, but it's only but
if he mentioned me on his show, that would be a windfall that would be number 100 million windfall.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the difference, right?
That's the difference.
Like his audience who will do what you do is limited.
Right.
Right. There are people who'll be like, oh, he went on so-and-so, that's great. But they're not going to take the time to like follow that link to actually watch or to subscribe or to whatever. Mm-hmm. Whereas they're already watching him. Right. So if you go on with him, then now they've actually got an audience who in that moment, if he says, okay, click here, might actually follow that person. Right. Exactly. There's a huge gap between what you're going to get based on what the decision is. And so, and for some reason, people think I don't like Jimmy Dore. I don't have a problem with Jimmy Dore. I actually probably, rough guesstimate, I'd say probably 70% of what he talks about, I'm in full agreement with, right? Like I don't take issue with him because I feel like he is a voice who's saying a lot of stuff that, he's able to say because he has a following and because he has his own show and because, he has a lot of followers and all that stuff. So he has the ability to voice things that a lot of people won't voice because they're trying to get to where he is and they're afraid if they voice it too soon, they won't be able to get there, right? Like he's already there. So he can say whatever the fuck he wants and it's okay. But what I take issue with is, and it's slightly personal for me. Like he's a very big supporter of People's Party, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he has failed dramatically in dealing with the issues. Like he'll say, yeah, they have problems, but that's a real quick brush off of some pretty big issues, right? And so, and then he, the whole thing, like, I'm an infiltrator and I'm a loudmouth and I think he's a right winger, which I don't. Like, these are all assumptions that are being made based on information that he's been given, mm-hmm. right? He's taken no time to really read through anything that anyone's attempted to provide so that he can understand where the real issues are. And I take issue with that, right? Like I take issue with you promoting something and being very dismissive of very real issues without even knowing what the issues are, right? Like, mm-hmm. I think at least if you're going to call me an infiltrator and tell me that I'm just trying to burn something down, that you would at least get verification of that before you say it in front of like hundreds of thousands of people. Right? Like, I don't think that's a whole lot to ask, and I think
an excellent point.
If you're going to tell people like you can't organize and say like you're a Proud Boy, you're out, like add the question, you're out unless you can prove to me that you're not a racist. Then mm-hmm. okay, like I'm okay with your spiel, right? Like go for it. But these are like small things that I feel like I don't know where, I'm not really sure where his core is coming from on these things. Like I feel like if you're really speaking up and you're really being a voice for like real things and real people and real organizing and unions and all these things, like that to me is core stuff that like you shouldn't do. Like you just shouldn't. Like you shouldn't just outright support something without acknowledging the real problems. Like mm-hmm. just the blow off of, they have problems. Like that makes it sound like, they don't have enough stamps in the office. Like it's not.
And he's done more than a few shows with Nick and supporting the MPP as well. Yeah, absolutely. I think that he would show the rest of us respect by looking into what our complaints are, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. So
that by the way is also is going to get your comment feed blown up.
Well, good. Blow it up, like, bitches. That helps my algorithm.
Right. I can only be honest. And like people take issue. Right. Like issue. And I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, do you want me to pretend like I don't know what I know? Or, like act like I don't have the information that I have, because that's also bullshit, right? Like, it's bullshit to know something is fucked up and to not say, hey, listen, that's fucked up. Like, that needs to be dealt with. Like, you can't, to do that also, it's as useless as arguing with people about nonsense when there are real problems going on. Like, acting like actively pretending that there is not a problem when there is a problem. I can't sit back with that. It's not in me to do that.
I understand. I can't really speak to that. But you know, I do think, going back to my simping, hold on, my light just fell over. Hold on a second. Come on. Is that actually better?
Yes. You're brighter now.
Oh!
There you go. Look at that.
A happy accident. Look at that. Holy shit. Okay, so okay, so what I will say is this. I will 100% stamp agree with you on the MPP conversation. But I will say that I do think I personally agree, because I have to say this because my next episode is going to be entitled Anna Kasparian Killed the Me Too Movement, or at least gave it a good funeral. So I'm going to be talking about that shit. And I think that that's important to talk about. And I think it's important that a lot of other female podcasters haven't really been talking about it too much. Sabby has, so props to her. I think that you know, some of the things that fight started about were very important. I think that, you know, like that issue, blackmailing on a sexual harassment issue, that needs to be discussed amongst feminists. But I also think that, you know, the debate over, you know, what happened in Syria and the coverage on Syria is extremely important as well. And I think that, you know, that I think Aramate and Jimmy are right on the things that they're saying on that front. But yeah, again, as far as it goes with the personal shit, and I don't need to know about that stuff.
Right. And I feel like, and I agree with you. I agree. Like, I feel like but to me, a journalist doing something that puts her integrity in question because her behavior is an issue, right? That's a story, right? Like, that's a story. Like, talking about what happened in Syria, and I'll be honest, like, I'm not fully knowledgeable on the information. My understanding is what Aramate did his story on was factual and was based on like the evidence that he got on the ground, which, you know, like, so again, like I said earlier, like calling his journalistic integrity into question about something that he did the full research on, to me, again, you have to fight that fight because that's a worthy battle to have. So I agree, like there are things that came out of that should be discussed, like, you know, the $10 million donation to TYT, that right, like, you know, you have to ask that question. So there are all these things that come out of those things that create issues and questions that should absolutely be discussed and had. And so like, you have to do that stuff. And I think it's just when, you know, when someone says that, right? Like, if someone writes and says, well, I don't understand how Anna can do such and such because, you know, it's detrimental to this movement, the answer shouldn't be like, you're just a door fan, because that's where my problem comes in, right? Like, then it stops being about the question and the statement and the fact, right? And starts becoming about why you said what you said versus becoming about what you said. Like, stop worrying about why I'm questioning the integrity of Nick Branagh and the structure of MPP. Stop questioning why I'm doing it and ask the question, like get the answer to the question that I'm asking, right? Because that's what I get all the time. Like, you're just a DNC person. Okay, fine. You want that to be the case, sure. But then go find out why they don't have bylaws. And then go look for their IRS documents and find out why you have to do the search to get the financial transparency, right? Like, go do that. And then, like, then we can have like, I don't care if you think I'm a shill, if you ask the questions and get the information that I'm asking. And then when I say to you, okay, prove to me that I'm an infiltrator, right? Like, the answer of, well, you're just an infiltrator because you're asking these questions. That's not an answer. Like, that's not proof. That's not a receipt. That's not right.
Right.
So,
and that's the kind of blind faith, following that we criticize, corporate Dems for, even Bernie followers for, right? We don't need that in another third party, because we just seen that in the Greens too, right? In a little bit with the Howie Hawkins BS.
Right.
I don't really know too much about
and
it.
And I don't know a whole lot about it. So,
like, people are not monolith. That's not the right word. Deities are not, people are fallible, right? Like,
they're not above critique. Right.
Exactly. And if, I worked with MPP for a while, and I got burned by them on a very, smaller issue. Like, my complaints with them was not huge. But it was enough to make me go, all right, well, I'm not really going to work with you guys unless it benefits me now. So, but I'm not actively against them. I would like to see them deal with these issues and correct some of the wrongs and come together and really, unite the left. I would love to see that. But I don't see that happening yet.
and that's something that people, I think, and I think I say it all the time when I have these conversations, and I did not mean to lead us down the MPP path, but I just want to, I want to make sure that I'm clear. Like, I don't want to see them fail. Like, that doesn't help me for them to fail, right? But if they don't start listening to the people who are asking the valid questions, they're going to fail. And it won't be because the questions were asked. It will be because they ignored the questions that were being asked. Right. Like, that's the part of it that I want people to understand. Like, you're mad at me for questioning how they're going to run 12 to 15 candidates when they've never raised more than, I think like at max last year, I think they were like $150,000 they raised over the year. Right. Wow. It might have been more. Don't quote me on that number. Maybe it was $250,000, whatever it was. Like, how many candidates are you running on that on a federal level? Yeah. Right. And if you're going to come to me and say, no, we've raised $20 million, whenever they do their reporting to the IRS, which hasn't happened yet, but maybe it's there now. I haven't looked in a while. But whenever they do their report, their semi-annual report that's required for the odd years, like, maybe they've raised, I doubt it, I could be wrong, but then, like, how are you doing that? Yeah. Right. You don't have a whole lot of state parties that are actually like legal entities active on the books. You have people working to get to that place. Right. Right. But you're not there. And it's July of 2021. And the majority of candidates have already announced, have already started their campaigns, have already started their work, have already started their fundraising. And you don't even have a slate. Right. So, so like, when I ask that question, if you to tell me, oh, you're just being unreasonable because they're young, which, okay, it's mid 2021. They've been in existence since fall of 2017. They're young. Sure. Okay. If we want to go with that fight. Okay. But how are they going to do it? Like, answer that question. Stop arguing me about fucking nonsense. Like, answer the question, right? Yeah. How are they going to actively do this thing that they're promising everyone that they're going to do with what they're with their current plan? That's the question I want people to answer, and to stop getting mad at me because I'm trying to get you to look at the problem, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all everybody's spinning in circles. Like, it's like fucking whack-a-mole. Like one, like everybody's like doing this random shit and nothing's happening, right?
Right.
Like, I think people should just find whatever's locally working. So like, if you live in Washington, which they're like, thank God they've got like, apparently like it's the wild, wild west with getting ballot access and policymaking and committees and all those things. You have a lot of progressive options, and MPP is one of them, right? Like, but they're a solitary entity, right? But they're doing it within their state. And I feel like that's valid. Like, you have something working in your state, right? If you like national progressives, or if you like the Green Party, or, whatever, and in your locality, that is an active, on the ground, doing something, serving a purpose, like, go for it. But this, this thing,
video, hon.
Sorry,
yeah.
There we go. Sorry.
Okay.
This thing of pretending like everything's okay, it's just a waste of time. Sorry, this is my husband calling me. This is why this is happening right now. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Go deal with it. I'll take a hit.
Sorry.
No problem.
My life. Yes, it does.
You said you're in the middle of moving too? That's epic.
Right. So we're still waiting for everything to kind of shake out, but hopefully before the summer ends, we'll be not in an apartment, and I'll be able to go outside and
Yay.
not do this thing upon walking out the door. We live in Brooklyn we live on like an avenue in Brooklyn, over a store, in between multiple stores. Yeah, like the bus stop is like next door, and it's chaos outside of my front door. So
yeah, you need a yard. That sounds good.
Yes. Yes, coffee outside without my mask.
Yes,
that's like my goal. That's it. That's all I want. That's it. I want to go outside with a cup of coffee and like drink, and not feel like I'm gonna, encounter some deadly epidemic. So whatever.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I lived in New York for 4 years, so I totally get it. I lived in Queens and then Brooklyn.
Okay.
And I never lived over a store, thank God, but I did, I understand. Yeah. I lived next to Prospect Park, actually, so that was at least really nice. I got to go there a lot.
I mean, Park Slope.
Park Slope. I was right outside Park Slope. Windsor Terrace.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. There's a big YMCA over there.
Yes, there is. I was a few avenue blocks away from that, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the area. I was more close to the highway. The overpass. Okay. Yeah. But anywho, what were we talking about? Oh, the MPP stuff. If you have anything else to say, you're welcome to do so. But then we can maybe talk more about the Medicare for All March.
Yes. Completely derailed. No, I think I'm good. Yeah, that was my point. Like, I'm not trying to burn anything down. I don't want it to fail. I want it to work properly. That's
Yes.
what I want.
Yes,
what I want.
absolutely.
And if it can't work properly, stop wasting everybody's time.
Right.
That's
right.
what I want.
And I don't know the specifics of some of the things you were talking about or your particular grievances, but I definitely see that there is, it seemed to be a spirit of democracy without the actual putting in practice of democracy within the organization, the running of the organization itself. And I think that's something they really need to think about and address. But anyway, so we don't need to be here to MPP bash, because again, I want them to succeed. I like Nick Branagh. I like everybody that works there. Everybody that works there really believes in what they're doing, and they really want to change the world. So I'll say that much, that everybody that I've met there are good people on that front, even if they are having issues with this.
Right. I'll let you hold on to that belief.
Okay, well that's fine. Because again, like I had a very
but you know what? Like again, like everybody's experience is different, right? Like your experience with some people is going to be very different than my experience with some people, and in the end, to me, like it's not about the individual, right? It's not about whoever. It's not about Nick specifically. It's not about this person specifically. It's about the organization as a whole being the promise of something that people need, and needing to ensure that they do the things that they need to do in order to fulfill that promise. And if they're not going to be the thing that they need to be in order to fulfill that promise, then stop wasting the time of the volunteers and the active people and the people who really want things to change and the people who need things to change, because they could go do something that's actually going to work toward that change, right? Like versus spinning in circles and getting nowhere. Like that's quite easy in my opinion, but again, who am I? Like I'm just like I'm just a regular person who just like wants people to be able to like live free and have their fundamental freedoms. Like,
I get it. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It is
for sure. All right, cool. Yeah, let's move on to the Medicare for All March, and let's talk about anything related to that. No, let's talk about you were talking to RJ a little bit about activism in general, and like how like I'm trying to remember exactly what I texted you. I'm going to look at our conversation because I forget.
I'm trying to remember. I think we were talking about like organizing in general being a groundswell, right? Like having people out on the ground in force, being an active picture of like, we want this thing to happen and we need people to understand that we want this thing to happen. And that, that's why, in my opinion, the march is absolutely a positive thing, right? You need to have boots on the ground, people in swell saying like, look, hello, like, can we have this conversation? Because Medicare for All keeps talking about, whenever I hear people in like major media talk about it, it's like, it's this random thing that like doesn't really need to happen, right? But they also never talk about the fact that we're the only country where you can go bankrupt because of a medical bill, right? Like where that's an actual term, like medical bankruptcy, right? Like, which I still, every time I say it to someone, I'm like, how did that happen? That we're the only country, the only place in the world where this thing exists, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that conversation isn't happening. The conversations about the people who forego medical care because they don't want the bills, that's not happening. The conversation about people who can't get the medicine that they need because of the cost of that medicine, those conversations are not happening. They're happening in like small pockets, but as far as major media goes, like they're too busy talking about like, you know, Obamacare and like the expansion of Obamacare and, you know, how they were like, okay, you expanded it. And for what? Like, why, you know, people are literally dying,
Yeah.
you know, and I could not believe that in the middle of a pandemic, right? In the middle of hundreds of thousands of people dying because of poor access to healthcare, that this thing happened, right? Made it exponentially expedited the problem.
Yeah.
And no one was talking about the fact that people don't have healthcare, right? Like all the people who lost their jobs, and like no one was having these conversations. And to me, that's mind-boggling, right? And people who don't see the value in having the conversation about why everybody can't have healthcare, that boggles the mind to me, right? Like
Yeah.
I said it on RJ's show, like I have healthcare, right? I can't think of a time when when I haven't had healthcare. I've always had a job that included benefits, and that's obviously like not everybody's story,
Right.
but just because I have access to it, like that doesn't mean you shouldn't have access to it, or like the person down the street shouldn't have access to it.
Damn right.
And right. And I can't remember what show I was watching, but somebody said like we're only as healthy as our unhealthiest person.
Yes. Like
Right.
you want to talk about learning about herd immunity, you know, like that doesn't just apply to COVID, you guys. Like that
Right.
applies to literally everything, including the common cold.
Right.
Like I don't need people sneezing around me because they don't, you know, because they went to CVS instead of going to the doctor because that's all they could afford. And I've been in that situation. You know, I've been on Medicaid, and I've been on Obamacare, and I've been on you know, employer sponsored plans. Okay. So I've like I had a taste of all the fields here. And Medicare was by far superior, except for the fact that you can't always find a doctor. And that's why people go to the ER, right? So but that means that if I can find a doctor, I don't have to pay for that doctor. I can get my meds for free. And those were things that were keeping me from really from like treating my mental health issues for a long time, was because I couldn't afford the doctors, I couldn't afford the medication. Specifically on Obamacare plans, because you're paying so much for the premium, even though they give you like, you know, a tax credit for it or whatever. I couldn't afford the copays, I couldn't afford the medication. I mean, that's a reality. And that was more of a reality when I was with I worked for a small laboratory in the pharmaceutical industry, and they had an employer a health, like an HSA program, like a health savings account. And that was I mean, that I might as well just had no health insurance at that point. But I was paying for nothing because I was paying too much for the actual insurance to be able to put anything in the health savings account that should then be paying for all my doctor's stuff and whatever. So like, you know, the only thing I got was like, I think once a year I got a free checkup, physical. That was it. That was my only benefit to that.
Right.
I was paying $100 a month for that shit.
Right. Right. And it really is. It's obscene. You know, it's ridiculous. And,
yeah.
You know, I listened to, you know, Jim Clyburn, who I just like I hate that I'm so filled with rage about somebody who had such an important role in a time that actually changed things, even as minutely as they did change things for the better for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like literally, like my life is what it is right now because of civil rights. And during civil rights, he was obviously like, you know, useful.
Right.
And now, like every time he talks, I want to like throw the device against the wall because I can't stand it. And it like, you know, so when you start following the money and you understand how much money he gets from Big Pharma and, you know, like and from insurance, and you understand that he is completely selling not just me, like not just when we talk about Black, like he's selling his entire voter base out
Yep.
for his donors, right? Like not even worrying about like Black, white, whatever. But like people are dying. Like he cannot, there's no way he doesn't know that people are dying because they don't have proper medical care. So for him to not be, to call himself a progressive and then to not be a voice for these things, you know, it's like, it's obscene. It really is. It's obscene. And there has to be a point, and I think I said this on RJ's show as well, where people start to understand that the real problem is money, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's not really about all the things that the money gets. It's about the actual money. So if you start cutting the money off, that's when you can start having an actual effect, because that's all these people give a shit about. Like that's all they care about is money. They care about their donors. They care about, you know, making sure that they've raised enough. They care about making sure that they have access to whatever it is they want to have access to when they're no longer in Senate or Congress or whatever, you know, and that's, you know, that's what they're concerned about. And so, you know, a general strike, like I look at, you know, general strikes in other places in the world, and I'm like, oh, right?
When? Let's do it.
Right. But then you also know that, you know, that takes a lot, you know, and it's a hard thing to ask someone to give up the things that they're already struggling to get. Right. To fight this battle. It's a hard ask. And, you know, I'll be honest, I don't know that I'm selfless enough to give up on some of the things that I like, you know, because there's very little you actually need. Like most of it is stuff that you like to have, not stuff that you need to have. And, you know, so it's hard to be judgmental of that, right? Because giving up on something, if you've already struggled to get it, to then say, okay, I'm gonna let it go, like that's a lot. That's a big ask. But,
and most people are in the, you know, the paycheck to paycheck situation. I certainly am. I'm in the paycheck to paycheck, like my paycheck to paycheck doesn't quite cover everything. So I'm constantly juggling shit, right? So like, you know, I can't. I don't have a family exactly. I don't have anywhere to go. I mean, like my girlfriend's family probably would take me in for a little while if I had to, but it would be cramped and awkward and terrible because they have a full house already. And you know, that's literally all I have. That's literally the only people that would take me in on an emergency, I think, other than friends and couch surfing. And you know, and I've been there. I've been couch surfing, you know, and I hate it, and I don't want to go back to that. So I don't know why I just started talking about myself all the time.
But it's true. But that's, you know, like
that's where most of the country is, right?
That's where so many people are. So you know, one of the things that I always, and I've said it to a few people, is like, you know, is there some company that people use, but you can use something else, right? It won't kill you if you use something else. And you just say, we're going to divest completely from that company. Like completely. Like you give to all these pharmaceutical companies, you give to all these insurance companies, you give to all these politicians, you are supporting the system that is killing people. Right. So we're not going to pay you anymore. We're not going to buy your product. We're not going to use your store. We're not going to, but you know, but then the question is like, which one, right? Like, where do you start? Right. Like, I'll admit, I really like Chick-fil-A. So when I saw,
oh, don't say Chick-fil-A around me.
So when I saw the video, like, and I stopped, honestly, like I stopped going there for a while when I found out that they were supporting Trump. And then when, you know, the CEO was supporting Trump, I stopped eating there because I was like, I can't have my money go to that. And so I stopped, and then Trump lost. So I was kind of like, okay, well, maybe I can have Chick-fil-A every now and again. Right. But then I saw the video of the people with like, you know, like the individual tent during the storm, like served, like taking orders out during the hurricane, right?
Yeah.
I can't eat Chick-fil-A, man. Like I can't support that, dude. Like I just can't. I can't.
No.
Right. And it
No.
sucks because the food's good, right?
I know.
But like I can't. So the question is like, can you get enough people to be disgusted with something that they say, you know what, we're going to start here.
Right.
Because if you can prove that you can do it with one thing, a few people will be scared enough that they'll be like, we're not taking that heat. Like, let's figure out whatever's going on. Right.
Right.
So then you can start doing it with other things, but that's a hard sell, and it's hard to find the right one. And, you know, and it takes somebody who's not me, because, you know, who am I? Right. Like, I'm like, you know, I work in a school. Like I'm not, I care enough to say it, but to actually get other people to do it, right? You need somebody who's going to be able to direct something like that.
Right.
You know, and I think back, I was a kid when Coca-Cola decided that they were going to divest from South Africa if they didn't stop apartheid, and that's literally what stopped apartheid, right? Like it was that moment that like changed, right?
Right.
You know, I didn't exist when all the Black people said, you know what, we're not getting on the buses anymore. We're just going to walk, right? Mm-hmm. And so the money stopped going into that system, and they had to do something in order to make their money back. Right. So if people step back a little bit and realize, like, that's where the bread and butter is, right? Like, that's it. Like, if you can survive getting something in 4 days instead of 2 days, maybe don't use Amazon as much, right? And this is me, a person who lives on my Kindle, saying that. So again, like, tricky, right? Like,
so,
you know,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, like, it's hard. It's a hard ask, and you have to figure out the best way to navigate it. And something like the Medicare for All March is just a start, right? Right. That's just on this day, we're going to prove that there are enough people in this country who care about getting Medicare for all for everybody, that we can show a visual representation of those voices. Yes. Right. But they're not going to sign for Medicare for all on July 24th. They're not going to vote on it. They're not going to have a conversation. It's not going to go into committees. It's not like, none of that's going to happen. No. Right. Right. But you may get someone who says, wow, look at the amount of people who came out on the streets to support this effort. And maybe we should be talking about it. Yes. Right? Maybe we should be having this conversation. Maybe we should be having this coverage on major media. Like, maybe these things should be happening in a more public space where you can get more support, and therefore force the people who have the ability to do the thing to want to do the thing. Right. Yes. So, and that's where it's tricky. That's where, like, my whole, like, can we not do the fraud squad thing? Like, you know, not because I agree with them all the time, and not because I think they're doing a stellar job, because I feel like really they're falling down on the job quite a bit, way more than I would like. It's also why I didn't donate to any of these campaigns, because I was very concerned about, like, what was going to happen. I'm not a big electoral politics person. I feel like a lot of it is wasted. It's a lot of wasted energy, a lot of wasted money, because people promise you things when they're running that they don't do when they actually get into their seat. Yep. But they're in the seat. Right. So that would be like me sitting behind the bus driver and, like, riding the bus and actively, like, cursing out the bus driver. Like, he can just ignore me. Right. Right. Which means he can also ignore me when I pull the bell to make him stop. Right. Right. So I got to wait for the next person so that I can get off and walk back to wherever the hell I'm going. Right. And you can say that too about the insurance companies, right? Because they have us by the balls. Right. By the balls. Yeah. Right. It's an awful predicament as a regular person to really be in, because you are at the whim of people who don't care about you. Yeah. Right. They literally don't care. Like, Nicole Maliotakis, who is my rep, in Congress, which, you know, like it pains me to even have to say that out loud. I didn't, you know, but I live close to Staten Island. It's a Republican area. She won the vote. It is what it is.
Yeah.
You know, but she could care less if, you know, like if I lost my medical coverage and I died. Like, she don't care.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Same thing for whoever the fuck my representative is. I don't even know.
Right. Like, they just don't care. And so there has to be a way to make them care. Right. And it can't just be about primaries, because those also end up being about money. Right. Like, in the end, even people who are very like, you know, we're all about like people money and we're people funded and we're, you know, all these things, like, you're still really about raising the money. Right. So I'm like even more impressed with people who are able to like get something done without raising a whole lot of money, because you've managed to figure out how to do something without being like, you know, like you know, like bound by this system.
Right.
That's all about capitalism.
Right. Totally.
Right?
Totally.
The whole thing is just about making money and who can make the most money and how can you make the most money despite whoever else can't survive because they're not making enough.
Right. Right. It's all about succeeding on the backs of others, essentially. Right. So let me say a few things. Number one, I think what you were talking about with Jim Clyburn is an excellent example of like sort of how I feel like boomers generally tend to rest on their laurels about some of these things, that they love to talk about what big, you know, splashes they made in the 60s and 70s, and they changed the world and everything's better now. What the fuck? Well, why don't you understand that everything's better now? And it's like, you know, I cannot say enough that shit is not better now. Like, yes, you helped me make a great move, you know. Hold on. Oh, my hat is so right now. That is better. Oh, gorgeous. Okay. So yeah, I mean, like yes, you guys took an amazing step forward, but we need to take another billion steps forward before we even get anywhere near utopia. Okay. So like, let's be honest about how a lot of the problems you were fighting still exist. And let's be honest that, you know, you were the first step and we need to talk about the second step now. And thank you for the first step. Thank you for the first step. But we need to talk about the second step now, right? Like, let's seriously, let's seriously talk about it. So, so that's one thing I wanted to say. And then, and then I feel like we should talk about, you know, it's one thing to, you know, like, yeah, like, okay, so I did have an entire conversation with Awkward about the general strike, and I'm in his little group about it and whatever. And I do think that mutual aid is the answer to a lot of our problems when we talk about a general strike. But I also think that there are things we can do in the meantime. And I really feel like we should, you know, talk about, like, you know, more creative ways to occupy buildings and to protest in that capacity, right? I mean, like, it's you know, it's difficult because there are a fuck ton more police now, I feel like, than ever, and they, you know, their job is to guard property, and you know, it's difficult for those reasons. But I think that there you know, we have to get creative. We have to get creative in trying to do things that will get, you know, that will get noticed in one way or another, right? So you know, because it's because you know, a lot of what we're going to be dealing with after the march, right, is that we've had this march, now what? You know, and there's so many corporations, as you were mentioning, with their fingers in this pie. You know, there's the pharma industry, there's the, you know, the doctors associations, there's the hospital corporations, the you know, everybody makes medical equipment, you know, I mean, like, just so many people who make money off of the illness of others that has become such a giant industry. We need to think about ways that we can fight back against these companies, because they're the people funding the government, and then the government is
Right.
deciding not to deal with this issue. So
Right.
yeah, like I think that that's got to be our next conversation. What are
Right.
we going to do to speak out against these companies? I think that companies that have a clear connection to imperialism and slavery, like Aetna, those can be our first targets. Happy to do that. So I really hope that once this march happens, and that once we get everybody together on the same page, hopefully we can use that as our first step. Like, let's think of this march as a first step, right?
Right. And it has to, that's really all it can be, is the very first thing.
Right.
Because the other thing that and as you were talking, I was like, I didn't say this, and it's important for people to understand that part of the reason that nobody wants Medicare for all is because Medicare for all means that you can now get any kind of medical service you need, right? And the money in medicine is not in keeping people healthy, right? The money in medicine is keeping people sick, right? Like the money in medicine is for the treatments, right? For the continued whatevers, right? The money is not going into stopping these things from happening. The money is going into maintaining your status enough that you have to keep paying someone else in order to stay living. Right. It's not to be healthy, it's to stay alive, which are two very, very different things. Right. So like, I have really high blood pressure, and the fight that I have with my doctor all the time is he wants me on medicine. And I'm like, I'm not, no, just like, no, I don't want to be on a daily medicine, because that's the best way to set your body up to fail.
Right.
The minute you don't have that medicine. Right. So like, I'm not going there with that.
Right.
And I hope he doesn't watch this, because he's gonna be really mad at me. But so, but that's like all these things, like it's all about not getting people to be healthy, but keeping people sick, because they never talk about vitamin regimens, or healthy eating, or all these things that simply could be done in order to have people have a healthier lifestyle, which would then keep them healthier, which would then prevent them from getting sick, which then means you don't need the medicine. Like it's all about, we're going to feed everybody garbage, and we're going to sell the sodas and the candy and the cereal and all these things, because the capitalist system requires that we sell you these things, even though we know it's killing you, right? Because then we can make money off of keeping you alive. Even though what we're doing is what's actively killing you. Right? Like it's like this never ending circle of just, circling the drain and trying not to go down. Right. Like,
yes.
And it's an awful system that's been set up. And, I get laughed at a lot for believing in socialist policies and feeling like, there has to be a point in which we take care of each other, and in which everyone being healthy is okay, and everyone having somewhere to live is okay, and everyone having a living wage and being able to, take the weekends off and go on vacation is okay. Like, there has to be a conversation where people start talking about, why isn't it acceptable for everybody to have these things? Like, why can't we all have the good stuff? Like, why, why can't we all enjoy the fruits of labor and be healthy and happy and live and have the things that you need to have in order to just live, right? Like, where did that go?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of that has to do with a lot of it is going to have to do on some level with changing people's understanding of how we need to live together, right? I mean, like, I'm a socialist, absolutely. I love to say that, at any point in time, there is a finite amount of wealth in this country. And if you don't have enough to live on, it's because somebody has too much. That's it. It's that simple.
It really is. Right.
Yes, absolutely.
And I saw a great meme about like, at some point, people are going to understand that they can't eat money, right?
Yes.
Like after you cut down all the trees and you burn up all the oceans and everything, you know, like all the workers can't work and things aren't growing and the environment's going, like when all these things happen, you can't eat your money.
Yep.
Right? So
Yep.
like when is that light bulb gonna go on for people that like even people are a finite resource, right? You can't, if you keep working people until they can't work anymore, then you're not gonna have any workers. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't help people sustain with what you're paying them as workers, then you're not going to have workers. So,
and you're not going to have consumers.
Right. Because those are the people who are buying also,
Right.
you know, it's such a, to me, it just makes so much sense. Right. And, you know, it's funny, I was tweeting with JB of the Fred Hamptons left this morning, and I was saying to him, like, I always want people to be logical. And then I remember that people typically are so selfish and like, you know, like logic doesn't play a role, right? Because they're too busy thinking about themselves and thinking about what they want. And, you know, and not that I'm not ever selfish, but, you know, I also feel like as a person, I recognize that like, I don't have to have everything because that's not necessary. I can have enough that I can be happy and healthy and live and take care of my family. You know, me and my husband take care of my family and be okay. And everyone else doesn't have to suffer for that. Right. And that's the part of it. That's the line of it that I don't understand, like why people can't see that, you know, like why have we gotten to this place where people are actually okay with hoarding everything, knowing that there's so many people that have nothing. I just don't.
Right. It's completely immoral, disgusting.
Right.
Right. But it's something that's existed throughout, you know, human history, honestly.
Right.
And so we really need to, you know, on some level, examine what it is about ourselves as humans and like our survival instincts that really, you know, we let run wild like that, and why we accept these things and sometimes idolize them. Right.
Right.
But I think also when we're talking about socialism, it's important to emphasize that if we all did distribute the wealth of this country equally, which is a significant amount of wealth, amount of wealth, we wouldn't really, I mean, people like you, people like me, we wouldn't really have things that we, you know, have to sacrifice. That's not that we wouldn't be sacrificing. The billionaires are sacrificing, and they have plenty to sacrifice. Trust me, they're not using it.
Right.
So, like, you know, that's the real thing. Like, we could be all benefiting from the wealth of this country, but we're not. That's it. Right. And that's what we need to remind people, that anybody who makes under 100,000 a year, not in a family, individually, anybody who makes under 100,000 a year, you're on our side. Okay. Right. Even people who make under like $400,000 a year, you're on our side for the most part. Yeah. Like you don't benefit from the hyper rich. And let's be honest about that, you know? Right. So anyway, I really, you know, like one of the things that I hope to promote with this podcast is that, you know, millennials are a extremely extremely educated generation and that we are extremely underemployed, and that there is a lot of labor and a lot of intelligence on our side. And I really hope that we can use it to, you know, build a better society in new corporations that are socialized, that the workers own the means of production. I really hope that we can start, you know, dismantling older corporations and building new ones. So I have hope a little bit. We'll see.
I hope so. I mean,
yeah.
You know, I'm Gen X, so I'm old, right? I'm not old, but like older. And you know, I just, at some point, someone else has to start the fight, right? And so I'm always excited when I talk to people who get it, like who see the problems, who are trying to figure out how to fix it. And it's a big fight. Like
Yeah.
getting the rich and powerful to let go of being rich and powerful, that is a battle that I don't really have the answer for, right? It's the same. It's like trying to figure out how to get a racist who is fully embedded in the privilege that they get from being a racist to not be a racist, right? Like, how do you get them to let go of that thing that they feel like gives them, you know, all of this high, you know, this being on the top of the hierarchical structure. And you know, it's difficult, and I don't have a great answer. I just know, you know, you keep plugging away, you keep saying what you can, you keep fighting where you can, you know, hope that people will listen. And, you know, maybe eventually one of these people that gets to the top, you know, actually does what they say they're going to do when they're getting there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And in the meantime, let's encourage people not to rely on leaders like that.
Right.
You know, let's be our own leaders here, because there are plenty of amazing, you know, unsung heroes in every community, like yourself. You know, organizing on their own free time and being awesome. I mean, that's how Chris Small started. He was just like awesome by himself, and then all of a sudden the rest of the world started paying attention, and like, you know, like that's where we need to go. And unfortunately, it's a really hard road, really hard road. But you know, also too, we should remind ourselves that it's a generational battle, right? This is a generational battle. Inequality is like going to be the biggest bane of human existence, right? So we need to also, you know, we're not going to solve it in a generation. We're not going to have an answer. Nobody's going to think of the right answer tomorrow. That's not going to happen. So, you know, we do need to just do what we can and plod along too. And, you know, it ain't sexy, but somebody gotta do it. Right.
I do have to go.
For sure.
But this is great.
This was an awesome conversation.
I hope you got enough to pull together however much you
Oh yeah, absolutely. And listen, rest assured, like there's some of the stuff like that we didn't, you know, maybe totally agree on or whatever, and like the MPP stuff, but I'm not going to cut that out. Like, I want your voice to be heard anyway.
I mean, listen, I trust you. Do what you got to do. And, you know, I know if you cut something, it's because it didn't make sense, like in the real. And, you know, I'm not going to worry about it. I appreciate it.
You were good. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Take care. All right.
Have a good one. Thanks.
You too.